Hi there VCEers. We're looking at split brain in this video. Split brain is possibly one of the more difficult concepts to get your head around in VCE Psych. It is consistently answered poorly on exams. But this video will hopefully give you an introduction to what it's all about. A couple of videos ago, we looked at hemispheric specialisation, or lateralisation. That is, the left and right hemispheres being more dominant in various functions. For example, the left hemisphere seems to dominate in verbal tasks, whereas the right hemisphere seems to dominate in non-verbal tasks. The effects of lateralisation were made clear by studies conducted by Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga. These studies were on the effects of split brain. As you may know, the two hemispheres in the brain are joined by the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is basically a bunch of nerve fibers that connects the two hemispheres of the cerebral cortex. You can see where the corpus callosum is situated in this diagram. We now know that without the corpus callosum, the two hemispheres of the brain cannot interact with one another. Sperry and Gazzaniga used split brain patients, that is, people who had had their corpus callosum removed, as participants in their studies. At this point, you might be wondering why these people had their corpus callosum removed in the first place. Sperry and Gazzaniga certainly didn't remove them themselves. Back in the day, it was thought that removing the corpus callosum might help with the reduction of epileptic seizures. So Sperry and Gazzaniga had these participants with split brain and wanted to test the effects of hemispheric specialisation. To do this, they provided visual information to either the left or right visual field of the participants. Due to the lack of corpus callosum, information from the left visual field could only be processed in the right hemisphere of the brain, and vice versa. The setup was a little bit like this. If the participant saw key in their left visual field, that information would be processed in their right hemisphere. As we know from our video on hemispheric specialisation, the right hemisphere tends to specialise in non-verbal functions. For that reason, the participant in the diagram is able to touch the key, but is not capable of verbalising what they have seen. Comparatively, the word ring is processed in the left hemisphere, because it is flashed to the right visual field. As the left hemisphere specialises in verbal functions, the participant is able to verbalise what they have seen, but is not capable of reaching out and touching it. SAC and exam questions on split brain could be varied. As questions on split brain are often answered poorly, we will look at two questions, one multiple choice and one short answer. We'll start with the multiple choice. This is from the 2012 VCAR exam. Initially, the question provides us with some information. This information is essentially a summary of what we have been saying about Sperry and Gazzaniga's studies and findings. The question then reads, the results of study number 1 suggest that A. Objects in the right visual field are processed by the right hemisphere. B. The left hemisphere can process words and can also enable words to be verbalized. C. The left hemisphere can process words but does not enable words to be verbalized. Or D. The right hemisphere is unable to process words when words are presented to both visual fields. We can immediately rule out option A because we know that objects in the right visual field are processed by the left hemisphere, not the right hemisphere. Option C also doesn't look too good because we know that the left hemisphere of the brain does enable words to be verbalized. It says as much in the information provided. That leaves option B and D. Option D says that the right hemisphere is unable to process words when words are presented to both visual fields. But if information is presented to the left visual field, it is processed by the right hemisphere. Whether or not there also happens to be information presented to the right hemisphere is irrelevant. So that leaves us with the correct option, option B. The left hemisphere can process words and can also enable words to be verbalized. The second question is a short answer question from the 2011 VCAR exam. The question is worth 3 marks and asks us to describe one finding of Sperry and Gazzaniga's split brain studies and explain how it has contributed to our understanding of the interaction between cognitive processes and the structure of the brain. Nicole, how might we be awarded the full 3 marks?
1 mark here will be for accurately describing one finding of Sperry and Gazzaniga's studies. Another mark will be for explaining how that finding has contributed to our understanding of the interaction between cognitive processes and the structure of the brain. And the third mark will be for linking Sperry and Gazzaniga's findings to the contribution of understanding.
Thanks, Nicole. So we could say this. One finding of Sperry and Gazzaniga was that when a word is flashed to an individual's right visual field, they are capable of verbalizing the word, but not touching a representation of that word. This contributed to our understanding of the relationship between cognitive processes and the structure of the brain, because it showed that the left hemisphere of the brain seems to be dominant in verbal functions, whilst the right hemisphere of the brain tends to be dominant in non-verbal functions. Participants in the study had had their corpus callosum removed, meaning that the two hemispheres could not interact. As information from the right visual field is processed in the left hemisphere of the brain, being able to name but not touch the object made this hemispheric specialisation apparent. That was a lot of information. If you're feeling confused or unsure, feel free to peruse the information below this video for a recap. Keep working hard and have a psychedelic day.
Click here to go to the Engage Wiki. Click here to go to the next video. Or, if you really want, you could just stare at this motivational poster.